The night had settled heavy over the small town, wrapping the streets in a hushed stillness broken only by the occasional hum of a car passing in the distance. A soft drizzle had started earlier in the evening, leaving the sidewalks glistening beneath the pale glow of the street lamps. Jack Matthews tugged the zipper of his worn jacket higher against the chill, as he walked back toward his apartment building, his grocery bag rustling with the week's bare essentials, milk, bread, a few apples for his daughter. Life had taught Jack to count every penny. As a single dad, every decision mattered. He wasn't a man who wasted words or money, but what he lacked in resources, he gave in love to his 6-year-old daughter Lily. She was upstairs with Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who often babysat. And Jack was eager to relieve her. He was bone tired from a long day of construction work, his hands rough and sore, but the thought of Lily's smile always gave him the strength to keep going. As he neared the building, Jack slowed. There, at the bottom of the steps that led up to the front door, sat a young woman. Her head was bent low, her hair a curtain of tangled chestnut strands hiding her face. She wore a pale coat that had once looked expensive but was now smeared with rain and dirt. Her knees were pulled tightly to her chest, arms wrapped around them, and faint tremors shook her shoulders. At first, Jack thought she might just be someone waiting, maybe for a ride, maybe for someone inside. But then he heard it, the sound of muffled sobs. Not the quiet, controlled kind, but the raw, broken weeping of someone whose world had just caved in. Jack's instinct was to walk past. It wasn't his business. He had his daughter upstairs, he had responsibilities. And he'd learned the hard way not to meddle in strangers' troubles. But as he placed one foot on the bottom step, he hesitated. Something in the way her hands gripped her coat, white, knuckled and desperate, reminded him of himself on the nights after his wife left, when he had sat alone, trying not to break in front of Lily. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, his voice gruff from uncertainty. The girl startled. She lifted her head, and for a moment Jack saw eyes so red and swollen from crying they seemed almost luminous under the streetlight. She tried to compose herself, wiping at her cheeks with shaky hands. But her words came out in a choked whisper. I have nowhere to go." Jack froze. He hadn't expected that. She didn't look like the usual people who sometimes wandered the neighborhood asking for spare change. There was a dignity about her, a refinement in the way she held herself even in her despair, but the despair was real. Written all over her face. He shifted the grocery bag in his arm, weighing his options. He wasn't a man with much to give. His apartment was small, yet even smaller. But leaving her here, crying on the cold, wet steps, felt unthinkable. "Do you have family nearby?" he asked cautiously. Her lips trembled. She shook her head quickly as if the very word family carried too much pain to explain. Jack didn't press. Instead he sighed and sat down on the step beside her. Ignoring the dampness that seeped through his jeans, he set his groceries between them, giving her space. "I don't know what brought you here," he said slowly. "And I won't pretend I understand. But it's too cold to sit outside all night." She turned toward him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Strangers didn't usually sit down beside her. Strangers didn't usually care. Jack looked back toward the door of the building, then up toward the window where a small light still glowed in his apartment. Lily was probably waiting, asking when Daddy would be back. He couldn't bring this girl into his world without caution. But something deep inside urged him not to walk away. "What's your name?" he asked. Her voice cracked. "Emily. Emily," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "I'm Jack. My little girl's upstairs. She's probably drawing all over the kitchen table right now." He gave a small, tired chuckle, trying to ease the weight in the air. "Look, I don't usually do this. But I've got a spare room. Nothing fancy, just 4 walls, a bed and heat. It's safe. If you need a place tonight, it's yours." Emily's eyes widened. She blinked rapidly, as if she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. "You do that? For me?" Jack shrugged, though his throat felt tight. "Everyone deserves a roof over their head. Even if just for one night." She pressed a trembling hand to her lips. The tears came again, but this time softer, gentler, as though his words had broken something inside her. Not in a painful way, but in a healing way. For a long moment, she didn't move. Jack thought she might refuse, might decide she couldn't trust him. But then she stood, hesitantly, like someone afraid the ground beneath them might vanish. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Just say yes," Jack said, picking up his groceries and standing too. "We'll figure the rest out later." As he led her up the steps, Jack felt a strange weight lift from his shoulders. He didn't know who Emily was or why she was out here crying in the rain. But something told him that offering her this small kindness was more important than he could yet understand. Behind them, the drizzle stopped, and the streetlight cast a soft glow. As though the night itself had paused to witness this quiet act of humanity. The apartment door creaked as Jack pushed it open, balancing the grocery bag in one hand, and holding the door wide with the other for Emily. She stepped inside hesitantly, her gaze sweeping the small living space, as though she were entering a place foreign and sacred. The apartment wasn't much. A faded couch with stuffing threatening to escape at the corners, a rickety coffee table scarred with crayon marks, and a modest kitchen where the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. But it was warm. And compared to the cold steps outside, it felt like sanctuary. Emily's hands clutched the straps of her bag, a bag that looked oddly too fine for someone who had nowhere to go. It was leather, though scuffed and weather-worn, and Jack noticed her boots too, high quality, but damp and muddy. Nothing about her fit the usual picture of someone homeless. But her trembling shoulders and the hollow look in her eyes told a different truth. "Daddy!" A small voice squealed, breaking the silence. From the hallway, a little girl came running, her brown pigtails bouncing with each step. Lily's cheeks were flushed with excitement as she leapt into Jack's free arm. Jack crouched down, hugging her tight and kissing the top of her head. The weariness of the day seemed to fall away in that moment. "Hey Bug," Jack murmured. "Were you good for Mrs. Thompson?" Lily nodded earnestly, then spotted Emily hovering in the doorway. She tilted her head curiously, her big brown eyes narrowing with childlike suspicion. "Daddy, who's that?" Jack glanced at Emily, who looked suddenly nervous under the gaze of a 6-year-old. "This is Emily," Jack explained softly. She's going to stay with us for a little while." Emily knelt down awkwardly, forcing a small smile. Lily." Lily studied her for a moment longer, then surprised everyone by darting forward to wrap her little arms around Emily's neck. Emily froze, caught off guard, then slowly melted into the hug. Her eyes glistening as if the gesture had undone some invisible wall inside her. "She's cold, Daddy," Lily announced matter-of-factly, her small hands tugging Emily further inside. "She needs a blanket." Jack's heart clenched. His daughter had inherited his late wife's kindness, and it always amazed him how naturally she extended it to others. "I'll get one," Lily chirped, scampering toward her room before either adult could respond. Jack motioned toward the couch. "You can sit. Make yourself comfortable. It's not much. But it's warm." Emily perched on the edge of the couch as though she didn't dare sink into it. She folded her hands tightly in her lap, her knuckles pale. "You really don't have to do this," she whispered. "I don't want to be a burden." Jack set the grocery bag on the counter and began unpacking items, trying to make the moment feel less heavy. "Listen," he said, pulling out the carton of milk. "This apartment's old, my couch squeaks, and the heater makes a noise like a dying tractor at night. But a roof's a roof. And I've got a spare room that isn't doing anyone any good right now." He glanced at her over his shoulder. "You need it more than I need the extra rent." Her eyes widened slightly. "Rent? You rent the room out?" "Yeah," Jack admitted, "sometimes. Usually to students or folks between jobs. Helps me cover bills." He closed the fridge door and leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "But tonight, it's yours. Don't worry about money. Just sleep somewhere safe." The word safe seemed to land on Emily like a lifeline. She swallowed hard, her lips pressing together as if she were fighting to keep from crying again. She looked down at her hands, twisting them together nervously. I can't remember the last time someone was kind just to be kind," she whispered. "There's always been something people wanted in return." Jack felt something stir in his chest at that. He didn't know her story, but he knew that look. The look of someone used to disappointment, used to being valued for everything but who they really were. Before he could respond, Lily returned. dragging a thick quilt behind her. "Here," she announced triumphantly, throwing it across Emily's lap. "This one's my favorite. Mommy made it before she went to heaven." Jack's breath caught, his throat tightening. He opened his mouth to tell Lily to pick another blanket, something less personal, less weighted with memories. But Emily was already clutching the quilt to her chest, her face crumpling. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers across the stitch patterns of stars and flowers. "Thank you." Lily beamed. "Now you can be warm too." Jack turned away for a moment, pretending to busy himself with putting bread in the cupboard, but in truth, he needed a second to collect himself. His wife's absence still cut deep, even years later. And yet here was Emily, holding that quilt like it was a treasure, tears in her eyes that spoke of wounds he couldn't see. After Lily skipped off to her room, Emily finally spoke again, her voice hushed. "I don't understand why you're doing this. You don't even know me." Jack shrugged. "Maybe I don't need to. Maybe it's enough to see someone hurting and know I can help. Even if just a little." Her gaze met his, and for the first time that night, a fragile smile touched her lips. It wasn't full or confident, but it was real. As the evening stretched on, Emily helped unpack the groceries, her movements careful, as if afraid she might overstep. When Jack offered her a simple dinner of soup and bread, she accepted with quiet gratitude, savoring each bite as though it was more than food, it was belonging. Later, when Jack showed her the spare room, a small space with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a single window looking out over the street, Emily stood in the doorway for a long moment, her eyes glistening again. "It's more than enough," she whispered. Jack gave a small nod. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will feel lighter." As he turned off the hall light, leaving her to settle into the room, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Emily than met the eye. Something in the way she carried herself, graceful even in brokenness, hinted at a life far different from this small apartment. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, she was simply a girl who needed shelter, and he was a father who believed no one should be left in the cold. And in that simple exchange, a bond began to form, one built not on money or status, but on kindness, trust, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the smallest offer can change the course of two lives forever. Morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Jack's small kitchen, painting soft golden streaks across the table scattered with crayons and worksheets. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of toast. Jack sat at the table with Lily perched beside him, her tongue peeking out in concentration as she carefully colored a picture of a house, the roof bright purple, and the grass an impossible shade of blue. Emily stood quietly near the counter, watching. She had woken before dawn, restless from a night of dreams she couldn't shake, dreams of boardrooms, cold marble floors, and a father's voice that never softened, even when she cried. But when she padded into the kitchen, barefoot and uncertain, she was met not with cold silence, but with the comforting chaos of breakfast. "Coffee?" Jack asked, holding up a chipped mug. Emily hesitated before nodding. "Yes, please." She wrapped her hands around the mug when he slid it toward her, savoring the warmth more than the taste. It had been days, weeks maybe, since she'd last felt at ease in a room. Lily, oblivious to the heaviness in the air, lifted her drawing proudly. "Look, this is our house. And that's Daddy, and that's me." She pointed to a stick figure with pigtails twice the size of its head. Then she paused, her brow furrowing. "But I don't know how to draw you yet, Emily." Emily blinked, caught off guard. "Me? Yeah," Lily said brightly. "You live here now, right? You need to be in the picture too." The Emily glanced at Jack, flustered, but he only gave a small, amused shrug. So Emily reached for a crayon and added a stick figure beside them, her hand trembling slightly as she drew. When she finished, Lily squealed with delight. "See, now we're all together." Emily laughed softly, though the sound cracked with emotion. She hadn't been included in anything like this in years. Certainly not with this kind of innocent acceptance. Over the next few days, Emily settled slowly into a rhythm. She helped with dishes, swept the kitchen floor, and one evening surprised Jack by cooking dinner. When he came home from work, exhausted and sore, the smell of garlic and roasted chicken filled the apartment. "You didn't have to do this," Jack said, Setting down his tool bag, Emily wiped her hands nervously on a dish towel. I wanted to. It's the least I can do after you've let me stay. Jack looked at the table. Set neatly with mismatched plates. Lily already sitting with her fork in hand, and felt a pang he couldn't name. It was as if for the first time in years, the apartment didn't just feel like a place to sleep. It felt like a home. During dinner, Lily chattered non-stop, telling Emily about her favorite teacher, her dislike for broccoli, and her dreams of becoming an astronaut. Emily listened intently, laughing in all the right places, her eyes soft and warm. After Lily went to bed, Jack lingered in the kitchen, rinsing plates while Emily dried them. The silence between them was comfortable, yet weighted with unspoken questions. Finally, Jack broke it. You're good with her, he said quietly. Emily looked down at the plate in her hands. She's easy to love, she murmured. Jack studied her for a moment. Emily, can I ask why were you out there that night, sitting on those steps? You don't have to tell me everything. He hesitated. I want to understand. Her hands stilled. For a long moment. She didn't answer. Then she set the plate down carefully and leaned against the counter, her shoulders slumping. Because sometimes family doesn't see your worth, she whispered. Even when you try your best. Even when you give everything. Jack didn't speak, letting her continue at her own pace. My father. Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard. He measures life in numbers. Profits, losses, achievements. I never seemed to fit into his formula. No matter what I did it wasn't enough. And one day I just broke. She looked away, blinking back tears. I left. I thought I could make it on my own. But the world feels so much colder when you realize no one cares who you are. Or maybe they care for the wrong reasons. Jack's chest tightened. He didn't know the details, but he recognized the pain of being unseen, undervalued. He'd lived through that too, after his wife left. Emily, he said softly. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who fail to see what's right in front of them. Doesn't mean you're worthless. It just means they're blind. Her eyes flickered toward him, searching his face. And for a brief second, something shifted, like the ground between them had grown closer. Thank you, she whispered. In the days that followed, Emily became a fixture in their lives. She helped Lily with homework. Her patience endless, her encouragement gentle. Jack often found them at the kitchen table, Lily grinning ear to ear as Emily praised her spelling words, or explained math in a way that suddenly made sense. One evening, Jack came home late to find Lily asleep on the couch, her head resting on Emily's lap. Emily looked up at him, her fingers brushing gently through Lily's hair, and in that quiet moment, Jack felt something stir that he hadn't felt in years. A sense of belonging. Of not being alone in carrying the weight of life. But alongside the comfort was a question he couldn't shake, who exactly was Emily? Her clothes, her posture, the way she spoke, it all hinted at a background far different from this modest apartment. She never spoke of friends, never answered her phone, and avoided questions about her past. Still, Jack didn't push. Because whatever her story was, it didn't change the fact that she was here now, and her presence had brought light back into his daughter's world. And his own. One night, after Lily had gone to bed, Jack and Emily sat on the balcony, sharing the last of a cheap bottle of wine. The city lights twinkled below, and the air was cool with the scent of rain. Emily leaned on the railing, her hair loose around her shoulders. Do you ever wonder, she said softly, if life is just waiting for us to prove something? Jack chuckled dryly. Every day. But I stopped trying to prove myself a long time ago. Now, I just try to be enough for Lily. She's the only opinion that matters to me. Emily's lips curved into a sad smile. I wish I could believe that. I've spent so long trying to prove myself to someone who may never really see me. Jack looked at her, his voice firm but gentle. Maybe the problem isn't you, Emily. Maybe the problem is who you're trying to prove yourself to. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. For a long moment, she didn't speak. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of something unspoken. Something fragile yet growing. And as the night deepened, Jack realized that Emily wasn't just a guest in his apartment anymore. She was becoming part of their lives. Stitching herself into the fabric of their little family in ways none of them had expected. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when everything changed. The sun was streaming through the windows, catching the dust motes dancing lazily in the air. Lily sat cross-legged on the living room rug, humming to herself as she built a precarious tower of blocks. Jack lounged on the couch with a mug of coffee, flipping idly through the classifieds, wondering if he could pick up a second job. Emily was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up as she kneaded dough. Her laughter drifting toward them when Lily shouted that her tower was now taller than she was. It felt normal. Too normal, perhaps, for three people who had come together by accident. Then came the sound that shattered the peace, the deep purr of engines pulling into the street outside. Not one car, but several. Jack frowned, setting down his mug. He moved to the window and froze. Lined up along the curb were black luxury sedans, sleek and gleaming in the afternoon light. Uniformed drivers jumped out, opening doors for men in sharp suits. They scanned the building with practiced eyes, their movements precise, purposeful. This was no casual visit. Jack. Emily's voice called from the kitchen, but it carried a note of unease, as though she sensed the shift in the air. He turned just as a knock thundered against the apartment door, firm, authoritative, demanding. Lily looked up, startled. "Daddy, who is it?" Jack pressed a finger to his lips. "Stay here, Bug." He rose, every muscle tense, and approached the door. He cracked it open an inch only to be met with the cold gaze of a man in a suit, an earpiece coiled neatly around his ear. "Mr. Matthews?" the man asked curtly. Jack's grip on the door tightened. "Who's asking?" The man didn't answer. Instead he turned slightly, calling over his shoulder, "We found her." Before Jack could process, a voice rang out. Familiar. Pained. "Emily." Jack's eyes flicked to the street, and there she was, Emily, standing frozen in the middle of the living room, flour still dusting her hands, her face drained of all color. Behind the suited men, stepping out of the sleekest car of them all, was a tall, silver-haired man in an immaculate suit. His presence was commanding, his expression a strange mix of relief and fury. "Dad," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. Jack blinked, stunned. "Dad." The silver-haired man strode forward, his eyes locked on Emily. "Emily Grace Harper," he said sharply, his tone carrying the weight of authority. "Do you have any idea what you've put me through? Disappearing without a word. Do you realize?" "Stop." Emily's cry cut through the air. Her hands shook as she pressed them to her chest. "Don't you dare come in here and speak to me like that. Not after everything." Jack's mind spun. Harper. He knew that name, everyone in the city did. Richard Harper, CEO of Harper Global, one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the state. And Emily was his daughter. It didn't make sense. The girl who had sat crying on his steps, who folded laundry with his daughter, who cooked soup like it was the grandest gift, that girl was the heir to a fortune. Lily scrambled to her feet, clutching Jack's leg, sensing the storm in the room. "Daddy, what's happening?" The Jack rested a reassuring hand on her head, though his own heart raced. Emily took a shaky breath, facing her father with tears in her eyes. "I left because I couldn't breathe in your world. Every day was about money, success, appearances. And no matter what I did, it was never enough for you." Her voice cracked. "I just wanted to be seen. Not as your legacy. Not as your investment. As me." Richard Harper's stern facade faltered, his eyes softened for the briefest moment, but he quickly masked it again. "Emily, you're my daughter. Of course I see you." "No, you don't," Emily whispered fiercely. "You see a future CEO, you see a pawn in your empire. But you've never looked at me and just loved me. Not the way Jack looks at Lily. Not the way a father should." The room went silent. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Jack's throat tightened. He hadn't meant to be dragged into their battle, but Emily's pain was raw, undeniable. He stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Harper, with all due respect, Emily's been here for days. She didn't ask me for a thing. Money, favors, nothing. She just needed kindness. A roof. A place to feel safe." He glanced at Emily, then back at her father. "And I think that says more about what she's been missing than anything else." Richard's jaw tightened. He looked at Jack, then at the tiny apartment behind him, his gaze lingering on Lily clutching her blanket and staring up with wide eyes. For a man used to penthouses and boardrooms, this small home must have looked painfully humble. Yet something in his expression shifted, as though he saw something here that all his wealth could never buy. Emily wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. "I don't want your money, Dad. I never did. I just wanted to matter. And here, in this little apartment, with this man and his daughter for the first time in my life, I felt like I did." Her confession pierced the air like a blade, raw and undeniable. Jack's chest ached hearing it. He wanted to protect her, shield her from the pain etched in every syllable. Richard Harper's face crumpled, the mask of power slipping. For the first time, he looked not like a CEO but like a father. One who realized just how far he'd let his daughter drift away. "Emily," he said softly, almost pleading, "come home. Let me fix this." Emily shook her head. Tears streaming freely now. "Home isn't a place filled with marble and chandeliers, Dad. Home is where someone cares if you're hurting. Where someone notices if you're gone. I found that here. Can you give me that?" Her father didn't answer right away. He simply stared at her, his eyes glistening with something that looked a lot like regret. Jack stood silently, his hand still on Lily's shoulder. His heart pounding. He hadn't expected this, he hadn't asked for this. But somehow, his quiet act of offering a room had pulled him into the orbit of people far beyond his world. And yet, watching Emily, he realized something. No matter her last name, no matter her father's billions, she wasn't the untouchable heiress the world thought she was. She was just a girl desperate to be loved. And for Jack, that truth mattered more than anything else. The air outside Jack's small apartment felt heavy, like the whole street was holding its breath. The line of black cars idled quietly, their glossy exteriors reflecting the fading sunlight. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, whispering at the unusual sight of wealth intruding into such a humble corner of the city. Jack stood frozen in the doorway, his daughter clutching his hand, her small fingers digging into his skin. Beside him, Emily trembled, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Her eyes darted between the suited men and the man stepping out of the final car. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried an aura of authority that seemed to make the air bend around him. His hair, peppered with gray, was combed neatly back, and his custom-tailored suit looked impossibly out of place on the cracked pavement of the old neighborhood. But it wasn't his clothes or his wealth that made Emily's knees buckle, it was his face. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. For a moment the CEO, Alexander Hayes, a name Jack only knew from the news, looked like a man who had lost everything. His eyes, sharp and commanding in boardrooms, softened with raw fear and relief when they landed on his daughter. His lips trembled as he breathed her name. "Emily." Emily's legs gave way, and Jack instinctively caught her before she collapsed. The CEO took a step forward, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel. But Emily buried her face against Jack's chest, shaking her head. "No," she murmured, her voice muffled. "You only see me when I'm gone. You never see me when I'm right in front of you." The words hung heavy in the air, cutting through the polished perfection of the moment. Jack felt his throat tighten. He wasn't part of their family. Yet the pain between father and daughter felt like something he could almost touch. Alexander's face crumpled. "Emily, I searched everywhere. When I realized you had run away, His voice broke for the first time, startling everyone around. His security detail looked away, uncomfortable at seeing the powerful man unravel. Emily pulled back from Jack, tears streaming down her face, and looked straight at her father. "You searched because you were afraid of what people would think. If the world knew your daughter had left you. You searched because you didn't want the scandal. But did you ever ask why I was crying every day in that big, empty house? Did you ever wonder why your daughter felt invisible?" Jack's daughter, Lily, who had been quiet the whole time, tugged gently at Emily's sleeve. In her soft, innocent voice, she said, "But we saw you, didn't we, Emily?" Emily broke into sobs, nodding as she hugged the little girl close. "Yes, Lily, you saw me. You made me feel like I mattered." Jack's chest swelled with both pride and sorrow. He wanted to say something, but he knew this wasn't his moment to speak. This was between Emily and her father. Yet, part of him feared that once this conversation ended, Emily would walk away from their lives forever. Alexander took another hesitant step forward, his voice trembling but firm. "You're right. I failed you, Emily. I thought giving you everything money could buy would show you love. But all I gave you was a cage of gold. He paused, swallowing hard. I didn't know how lonely you were. I didn't know you felt unseen. But seeing you here, clinging to this man and his daughter, it broke something inside me. You deserve better. You deserve me to be better. The sincerity in his voice startled even Jack. This was not the voice of a CEO delivering a speech. This was a father, stripped of power, stripped of pride, begging for his daughter's forgiveness. Emily wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Her heart was torn. Between the warmth she had found in Jack's home and the blood bond she shared with her father. She stepped closer to Alexander, studying his eyes as though searching for the truth. Do you mean it, Dad? She whispered. Do you really see me now? Not the CEO's daughter. Not the girl you parade at galas. Just me. Alexander's eyes glistened with tears. I see you, Emily. And I promise, from this day forward, I'll never let you feel invisible again. The silence stretched, broken only by the quiet hum of the idling cars. Emily slowly stepped forward, and for the first time in years, allowed herself to fall into her father's arms. He held her tightly, as if afraid she would disappear again. Jack turned away, his throat burning. He knew what this meant. Emily had her father back. She had her world back. Whatever they had shared, the laughter over meals, the quiet conversations at night, the feeling of family, it would all fade into memory. But before he could retreat, Alexander released his daughter and looked directly at Jack. For a man used to commanding boardrooms, his expression was startlingly humble. Thank you, he said, his voice raw. You sheltered my daughter when I couldn't. You gave her what all my money couldn't buy, kindness. I owe you more than I can ever repay. Jack shook his head quickly, uncomfortable under the weight of the man's gratitude. You don't owe me anything. She needed help, and I just did what anyone should. Alexander studied him for a long moment, then glanced at his daughter, who was still holding Lily's tiny hand. His lips curved into a faint smile. Perhaps not anyone. But perhaps someone who understands what family truly means. Emily's gaze flicked between her father and Jack. Her heart knew the truth: wealth could buy comfort. But it could never buy the love she felt in this little home. She knelt beside Lily, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. I'll never forget what you both gave me. You reminded me who I really am. Jack forced a smile, though a part of him ached at the thought of losing her. You'll always have a place here, Emily. No matter what. For the first time, Alexander placed his hand on Jack's shoulder. Maybe this isn't the end, Jack. Maybe this is the beginning of something none of us expected. The words lingered, like a quiet promise. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Emily stood between the two men, her past and her future, and realized she didn't have to choose one over the other. She could carry the love she'd found here back into her father's world, reshaping it, healing it. And for Jack and Lily, the memory of one act of kindness, offering a room to a crying stranger, would ripple through their lives forever, proving that even the simplest compassion could change the course of destiny.